We absolutely love this woman. So it is with my great pleasure and respect and awe that I introduce to you Marianne Williamson.
Thank you, Reno. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, Reverend Lisa. That was a very generous and kind introduction, for which I'm extremely grateful, because this is a home space for me. Has always been. When I ran for president last time, many people acted as though, oh, she left that behind. And nothing could have been or could be further from the truth. I see my grounding in spiritual wisdom, my own personal journey as a spiritual seeker, as the foundation. This seems a little loud, maybe, correct? I mean, oh, maybe I just needed to step back. As the foundation of my own life journey. And that does not change. You know, sometimes people see spirituality as just a different category of your life. You have your spirituality over here, you have your career issues over there, you have your relationship issues over there, you have your health issues over here. But I think that the issues of spirituality, which are simply the issues of the heart, lie underneath all other categories and give fuel and meaning and purpose to all other categories. Because once again, all that spirituality is a path of the heart. So I think that that path of the heart should apply to politics no more and no less than it should apply to anything else, because I think it should apply to everything. And when people said to Mahatma Gandhi, how could you, such a religious man, be involved in politics? His response was, is not politics a part of Dharma too? I think that if we are here seeking to be a light unto the world, which is simply to say, to bring love into the world, I don't think that we should leave any category of our experience out of that. I also think it's very significant when you look at American history, if you see the role that has been played by deeply religious and spiritual forces in the beginning of the abolitionist movement among white people. That emerged from the early evangelical churches in New Hampshire. Many of the women who were the leaders of the women's suffragist movement were religious Quakers. And let's not forget, Dr. King was a Baptist preacher. So the greatest social justice movements in the history of the United States have emerged from those deep waters. The deep waters that have to do with people's commitment, not whether or not something seemed possible, but whether or not it seemed like the right thing to do. Now, with spirituality, the path of the heart, comes faith in what is possible when love is present. It's faith in the unseen for that very reason. You know, I was reading that famous quote from Albert Camus. He said, in the midst of winter, I found there is within me an invincible summer. Now, that's a kind of secular way of expressing a great religious theme that is founded at the heart of all the great religious and spiritual teachings of the world. Just to take Judaism and Christianity right now, there were 40 years between the condition of slavery, the Israelites enslaved by the Egyptians, 40 years before the entrance to the Promised Land. And in Christianity, there was 3 days between the crucifixion and the resurrection. And those are powerful statements, much like in the midst of winter, I became convinced there is within me an invincible summer. That invincible summer means, the resurrection means, the entrance into the Promised Land means that night will always turn into day. Now, when we are in the midst of a problematical time in our own life, a crisis of some kind, faith plays such an important role because it is an antidote. It is a counterforce to hopelessness. It is a counterforce to despair. Those 3 days between the crucifixion and the resurrection, those 40 years between the condition of the slavery, the Israelites enslaved as opposed to their entrance into the promised land. Those periods of time, that 40 years, those 3 days, are very significant. What it means is that within the world as you know it, it will take some time before you will see evidence of the new condition. It will take what you experience as time to see the evidence on the material plane of the new condition. That period of time, my friend Sandy used to describe that period of time as tomb time. It's when you don't yet see, because the body is in the tomb. You don't yet see that which is brought forth, but the world is pregnant with that new condition. Now, I think that there are times in our lives where we learn these things. They are central. These principles are central to personal transformation. It is central to personal transformation that we stand on a ground of being in which we know, yes, crises come, but a crisis can be endured and a crisis can be transformed. But who we are in the midst of the crisis will determine what happens next. In Christianity, for instance, Jesus, there was someone crucified to his left, there was someone crucified to his right, but we don't read about their having resurrected. So the metaphysics there is it was the consciousness of Jesus. So this is true of all the great religious figures. It was their consciousness. It was the consciousness of the enlightened. And all of the great religious and spiritual teachings speak of, in their own way, of the evolution of humanity, that we might see all the great religious beings as the teachers who represent the human potential. The fact that humanity will one day live with the same alignment of consciousness which they did. And in the case, for instance, of Moses, as in the case of Jesus, you see in historical terms, as represented by Scripture, the fact that their consciousness led to openings within material conditions, breakthroughs within material conditions that would not otherwise have occurred. So that's the path not only of individuals, it is the path of the human race. And right now, what we are experiencing in a way that most of us have not seen in our lifetime is not just a crisis that has to do with your life, but a crisis that has to do with our life. A crisis that has to do with a crisis that the species itself is experiencing. The fact that our country, the fact that our species is being confronted in many ways no differently than we ourselves individually are confronted at times by situations that basically carry the message, you better take a deeper look at yourself than you've been doing. You better start practicing some principles here, because none of the external fixes that you've come up with heretofore are moving the needle. So let's stand on a different ground, and you stand on a different ground, and what do you have to do? Well, what you have to do as an individual is take a good look at yourself. You have to be willing to look in the mirror. You have to be willing to be brutally honest with yourself. You have to be aware. If you're in AA, you have to acknowledge the nature of your character defects. If you're Catholic, you go to confession. If you're Jewish, the holiest day of the year is the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. So whole groups of people, all that a group of people is a group of individuals. That's all that a nation is. So the same psychological, spiritual, and moral principles that prevail within the journey of an individual prevail within the journey of a nation. It's no different. So your life, your future is not going to be what you want it to be unless and until you're willing to clean up the past. And we all have within us, and whole groups of people have within us as well, an unconscious desire not to look too deeply at our own shortcomings. We have a natural impulse to want to point to other people's shortcomings, where other people got it wrong. But you don't transform as an individual or a nation if you're only going to talk about where other people got it wrong. So I think that we are living at a time where we have to take a good look in the mirror, not only as individuals, but also as citizens of this country. Being in this church today, I know many of you, Lisa very generously said many of us have known each other for a very long time. The idea that has been presented in the media of me as the kind of ditzy kook crystal lady is particularly ironic, given that I'm not known for that in this community. I'm known for the one who says we've got to be serious, mature adults. I'm the one who has said for a long time that those of us who are involved with issues of personal transformation, spiritual understanding, I've mentioned for a long time, we're the last people who should be sitting out the great social and economic issues of our day. Why? Because if you have a clue what changes one life, you're the one with the clue as to what would change the world. Spiritual wisdom applies to everything because it means come clean. Come clean. What are the principles on which you purport to stand? Okay. Now, do you or do you not stand on them? And where you don't, atone and change course now. And that has not only prevailed within the journey of individuals, it has prevailed within the journey of our country. We have a mission statement in this country. Our mission statement is the Declaration of Independence. And we all know if you have a mission statement, you have a sense of your purpose. You are far more empowered within any situation when you go into that situation very clear about your identity and about your purpose. Those are the two biggest powers. Who am I and why am I here? Now, as Americans, that question is just as powerful, and that is inscribed in the Declaration of Independence. Those are the principles on which we purport to stand. And it begins with all men are created equal. Now, all men are created equal. Those words did not just represent a earth-shattering step forward for the human race in political terms. It also represented an earth-shattering step forward in moral and spiritual terms. I remember as a child being taught, many of us do, I'm sure, that when in old Europe, the king, for instance, in France, was those things were referred to as the divine right of kings. That's what the old system said, that God gave power to the king. And when our country was founded, that entire paradigm, that entire way of looking at the world was turned on its head. That God didn't just give power to the king, that God gave power to everyone because God created everyone equal. Now, that's not just theory. Over 600,000 people died in the Civil War in this country arguing over just that. And Abraham Lincoln saw the Declaration of Independence as the moral purpose of the Civil War. If all men are created equal, you can't have slavery. If all men are created equal, you can't have the institutional suppression of women. If all men are created equal, you can't have segregation. Not if, along with that created equal part, lies that all men were given inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What would we call that in today's terms? Everybody has the right to self-actualize. Can we just for a moment consider how profound that is? That was profound in 1776. It is no less profound today that everybody should have the right to spread their wings. Everybody should have the right to soar. Everybody should have the right to fly as high as their own efforts will take them, as long as they don't hurt anyone else. And then it goes on. Then it goes on and it says that governments are instituted to secure those rights, not to chip away at those rights, not to undermine those rights, not to diminish those rights, but to secure those rights. And that if the government is not doing its job, it is the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it. The right of the people to alter a situation that was not in alignment with the Declaration of Independence. That's what the abolitionists did. That's what the women suffragists did. That's what the early labor organizers did. That's what the civil rights movement did. It was not without struggle. It was not without sacrifice. And in many cases, it was not without sacrifice of people's lives. But they held the very ideal as so important, not only to themselves, but to their children and their children's children. And they took responsibility. You know, this is not just about our rights, it's about our responsibility. It's about our responsibility as every generation we are the keeper of that flame. The flame is the ideal itself. And you might say, well, you know, my rights aren't being impinged upon. My economic rights aren't being impinged upon. My religious rights aren't being impinged upon. My ethnic rights aren't being impinged upon. I'm fine. But this is not just about you. It's about all of us. And as Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Now, I'm running for president because I think what's happening in our time is not that different from what has happened before. Let's talk for a minute what happened in 1776 when those 56 extraordinarily brave men signed that document. Let's remember, by signing the document, the Declaration of Independence, the men who signed it were risking their lives. Why were they risking their lives? Because they were declaring independence from England, which was treason against the King of England, which means that if the British had won the war, they would have all been executed. They would have been hanged. So the level of characterological profundity, that who among us would do that? I mean, ask yourself, would you have done that? To put your name to that document knowing, oh, if this doesn't go well, I die. But it's also true that out of those 56, 41 of them were slave owners. So 56 signed the document, but 41 of them actually lived their lives in a way that for their own financial and or ideological purposes, they didn't really mean it. They, in fact, for their ideological and financial purposes, had no intention whatsoever of seeing those principles, those ideals actualized universally the way the Declaration calls for. Now, what does that say about us? What does that say about us as a nation? I think what it says is that we're both and. We have always been both and. It's almost a bipolar characterological aspect to the American character. We have always been from the very beginning, and we are now. Filled with people for whom those principles, for whom the profundity of those principles is so clear, and the relevance of those principles is so obvious that those people are willing to do whatever it takes to keep them alive, to protect them from encroachment by any forces that would diminish them, and to seek in whatever way we can to expand them in our time for future generations. That was true then, it's true now. But there have also been, and this was true then, and this is true now, people who, for their own ideological and financial purposes, have no intention of seeing these principles manifest on a universal basis. Now, how did we do historically? Well, historically, we've done pretty darn well because other generations responded to history. They responded to slavery with abolition. They responded to the institutional suppression of women with the women's suffragist movement and the passage of the 19th Amendment. They responded to the economic injustices of the Gilded Age with the establishment of organized labor. And they responded to the institutional suppression of black people in the form of segregation in the American South with the civil rights movement, the passage of the civil rights movement, the Voting Rights Act, and so forth. In other words, our ancestors, everybody talks about the problems of American history. It's true, and we need to identify them. But let's identify with the problem solvers. And more than anything, let's not kid ourselves that, oh, everything's cool now. We don't have to worry about any of those forces anymore. Because those forces that are counter to democracy are as alive and well in our time as they have been in any time. Every generation lives out the struggle, some more dramatically than others. Some generations have to rise up. Some generations have to see, some things are happening here. Some things are happening here that are not exactly in line with the Declaration of Independence. And our ancestors pushed back. Now, in our time, it's not one institutional reality. It's an economic paradigm. It's the idea that you don't necessarily have universal health care because that would cut into the profits of the insurance companies. Over 1 million people rationing their insulin in America because anything else would cut into the profits of big pharmaceutical companies. You have carcinogens in your food that you're buying for your kids because anything else would cut into the profits of the big food companies. And there are chemicals in the pesticides that your children might be affected by because anything else would cut into the profits of the big chemical companies. And farmers all over this country in the farming sector and the land itself desecrated because anything else would cut into the profits of big ag. We have, despite the expressed desire of both Republicans as well as Democrats, majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want universal health care. Majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want common sense gun safety laws, but some of those don't exist because that would cut into the profits of gun manufacturers. And we're ramping up rather than ramping down fossil fuel extraction, even though scientists tell us this could literally make whole swaths of the planet uninhabitable within decades because anything else would cut into the profits of the big oil companies. And we have in our lifetime, from Iraq to that last 20 years in Afghanistan, fought wars that everybody, right, left, everybody gets now. Were spectacular moral as well as military failures for no other reason than that anything else would have cut into those $6.5 trillion profits of the defense industry. In other words, those industries, those corporate interests, insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, big food, big ag, big chemical companies, gun manufacturers, big oil, defense contractors, they are the new aristocracy. They're no different than the landed gentry that we repudiated in 1776. And it is time to repudiate them again because their short-term profits now supersede democracy. They supersede the principles of the Declaration of Independence. They supersede the safety, the health, and the well-being of you, of our children, of our earth, of our future. Their profits are now the governing principle of our country, that they get theirs first. And their undue influence in Washington is so great, they've turned Washington into a system of legalized bribery. And we're still this great experiment in self-governance, but how does that help us when people that we elect to represent us go to Washington and in policy after policy do more to serve the financial gain of their donors than to serve the express will of their own constituents? And if that means that the government that was instituted to secure our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, if in fact that means they're not doing their job, then we need to remember what the Declaration says. It's the right of the people to alter that or to abolish it. And I'm certainly not here saying let's abolish it. Darn right. Let's alter that. It's our turn now. Now we take a word like political, and we use it to separate ourselves. You know, it's so interesting. I want to tell you. When I've traveled abroad, I have this little joke with myself that whenever I'm in an airport about to fly from one place in another country to another place in another country, I often say, God, I hope I get to sit next to an American. Why is that? Why do I like when I'm out of town to sit next to Americans? Because as much, honor and respect and even awe of different countries and their magnificence, there's something about the Americans. We're a little vulgar compared to other countries. One of the things that I really like about us is we get down and get real very quickly. And you could be talking to somebody, and within 30 minutes, you know who's in therapy, who's been in a toxic relationship, who's having to set some boundaries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When it comes to our personal lives, we get real, we get honest, we get authentic, and I think that in large part because of the whole higher consciousness movement, I think there's a lot of psychological perspicacity, a lot of real psychological insight that we normally at least try to apply to our personal lives. But when it comes to our collective life, now you don't have to use a word like politics. Politics takes it into our collective life. All that politics is, our collective behavior. Personal life, what I should do. Politics is what should we do. Because our collective decisions have profound effect on our lives and on the people of the world. But when it comes to our collective decision making, we've been trained to farm out our best thinking. We've been trained to farm out our best critical thought processes. We've been trained to kind of dumb it down. We've been trained to not be real, not be blunt, not be authentic. And we have allowed ourselves this weird, codependent way of being lured into the idea that somebody else does it better and they know what they're doing. And they're the experts. Yeah. How we doing? I would say they've taken us to 6 inches from the cliff. We're 6 inches from the cliff in terms of the state of our democracy. We're 6 inches from the cliff in terms of the state of our environment. 1 in 4 Americans live with medical debt. Debt is crippling. Over 1 million Americans ration their insulin. 1/3 of American workers live on less than $15 an hour. Half of them cannot find a place to live. Half of our seniors live on $25,000 a year and less. We're continuing to ramp up rather than ramp down fossil fuel extraction. How are those experts doing? How are they doing? And I want to remind you that Thomas Jefferson said that the only safe, and this is to me, it's so profound when you think about it. He said that the only safe repository for power is in the hands of the people. The people. That's why they wanted free public schools, because, as he said, only if people are educated will they have the critical thought processes that will be required for the governance of a great nation. So they said, okay, if you give people a free press so they know what's going on, if you give people free speech so they can talk about it, freedom of assembly so they can gather, and free public education, then that means that more than not, we will be able to rely on them to make the decisions that will take the country in the best direction. It's not that they assumed we would always make the best choice. They weren't stupid, but they felt that that was the best bet of possibility. They didn't foresee that, contrary to their own warnings and everything they possibly could do in our Constitution to make sure it wouldn't happen, they didn't foresee the ways that we would allow ourselves to give up our power to those who know about those things. You know, the experts, you know, the political elite, the political class. They're into politics. They're handling those things. And that's where we've been for decades. Well, you know, I'm worried about what's happening in the country, but, you know, there are some people who know about these things, and I'm sure they're handling it. Really? Because what we're seeing in our time is institutions faltering that we just thought would never falter. We just took it for granted, and we farmed out. We farmed out our own best thinking. We farmed out our citizenship in a very real way. And now, we are where we are. Now, President Eisenhower said, the American mind at its best is both liberal and conservative. There are high-minded liberal values, there are high-minded conservative values. And at their best, it's kind of like a yin and a yang. No one owes it to you to agree with you. Nobody has a monopoly on truth. The whole vision of the founders was everybody will put in their best ideas, and we're not going, the whole point of the founders was it's not going to be just one group. It's not going to be just the rich people. And ultimately, it's not just going to be the white people. It's not going to just be the straight people. It's not going to just be the Christian people. And that's no different than it's not just going to be the political elite. No one group of people is supposed to be making the decisions. It's so radical. It's supposed to be us. And that's what voting is. I mean, I think to really allow ourselves to get, and it's not about who's left, who's right, who's Democrat, who's Republican. We've all got to get out of our silos now. It's bringing us down. We talk about how we're so sorry to be separated, but we separate ourselves. Oh, well, I'm a progressive. Oh, I'm a liberal. Oh, I'm a conservative. Oh, I'm a libertarian. Oh, I'm an independent. Well, those things are simply lines of separation. And where we need to be speaking from right now is right here, not right there. Right here, without apology. You know, I read a book a few years ago. Some of you might have heard me talk about it because I've talked about it in public. There's a man named James Doty. Some of you might have already encountered him. Dr. James Doty is a neurosurgeon at Stanford Medical School. And he also founded, with the Dalai Lama, a Center for Compassion there. And he wrote this book. I highly recommend it. It's a little book called Into the Magic Shop. When James Doty was a little boy, he grew up in a very poor family in Southern California with every manner of adverse childhood experiences you can imagine. The depressed mother, the alcoholic father, poverty, a very difficult childhood. And he used to seek to escape his problematical home by riding his bicycle over to a magic shop. One day, a woman comes out from the back of the shop, and she was the mother of the owner of the magic shop, who was visiting, I think, from Ohio. And she introduced herself, and she said, you know, Jim, I can teach you real magic. He said, really? She said, yes. You come here every day for 6 weeks at a certain time, and I'm going to teach you real magic. Now, he learned later in life that what she had taught him were the basic tenets of Eastern mysticism, meditation, and so forth. And he practiced the principles. I think her name was Ruth. And he practiced the principles Ruth had taught him, was able to make his way out of certain conditions, make his way into college, medical school, and so forth, and became a very, very successful surgeon. And the book opens with a particular scene. And in this particular scene, he is about to do operation on the brain of a little, I think, 4-year-old or 6-year-old boy. And the little boy is lying in bed. His very concerned mother and grandmother are standing there. Jim comes in. He says, what are we going to do, little dude? He says, you're going to take the bad thing out of my head. Absolutely we are. We're going to take the bad thing out of your head. We're going to get you out of here playing with your friends in no time. But it's still brain surgery. So he goes into the operating room, and everything's going fine until something happens. I don't know if somebody took their eye off I don't know what happened. Something happened, and all hell breaks loose, like a scene out of Grey's Anatomy or something. And everybody's going, we're losing him, and they're watching the machines going down, and a doctor's underneath the table cupping his blood. And Jim knows that something has to be clamped inside this child's brain But there's so much blood in the cavity that he can't see where he's supposed to go. In that moment, he steps back. And he's the main neurosurgeon. Everybody's like, why is he leaving the table? He steps back. And he closes his eyes. And he remembers everything Ruth told him. And he got very clear. And he walked back to the operating table, and he put his hand into that cavity, and his hand knew where to go. And he was able to clamp whatever he needed to clamp. The bleeding stopped, the operation went on, and everything was fine. In metaphysical terms, you could say the universe is both self-organizing and self-correcting. Within slavery was the possibility of abolition. Within winter is the certitude of summer. Within the crucifixion, there is the certitude of the resurrection. Within the enslavement in Egypt is the certitude of the promised land. Because the universe knows how to right itself. And we are living at a moment where we as a generation are called upon to right things. And we must do this because our young people are spiraling down. You know, those of us who are older, we've seen tough times before. We've seen tough times in this country. We remember things like the Vietnam War. But we also knew a time when there was a middle class, a thriving middle class. The average American couple could afford a car. They could afford a vacation yearly. They could afford a car. They could afford to send their kids to college. They could afford one parent to stay home. We have an entire younger generation who doesn't even remember that. They don't even remember a thriving middle class. And people are spiraling down. People's lives are falling apart today. There's too much misery. There are too many people having too hard a time. When you have a majority of people living paycheck to paycheck, when you have a majority of people saying they live with economic anxiety, the majority of people who are struggling to make it, this is not sustainable. But other generations stood up at such a time, and they course corrected, and we can too. Now, Jim was able to course correct because he went into his center, he found his alignment, and they knew what to do. I don't think it's an accident that so much of abolition came from those early evangelical churches. I don't think it's an accident that so much of the women's suffrage movement emerged from the Quakers. I don't think it's an accident that Dr. King was a Baptist preacher. Why? Because the character that it took, the character to stand forth, to say, this is not tolerable. That's what moral certitude is. Any of us who have had teenagers, we know what happens. Usually 14, 16, 17, usually sex, drugs, or alcohol is involved. And something rises up and you say, that will not be happening in this house. And you're actually laughing inside because you actually don't know what you would do at that moment if they challenged you. But you were told, that will not be happening in this house. Do you understand? And the conviction, the Course in Miracles says, miracles are born in conviction. Because you will do anything to save your child. You will do anything to make sure your child is safe. That is the conviction needed now. That we don't even have to know exactly how we're going to fix it, but we're not going to sit this out. We need to go back into our alignment. And I have been saying, as I said from the very beginning, those of us who know these principles, we're the last people who should be sitting this out. We're the last people who should be sitting this out. We should be the people most available, most willing to say, I have seen how returning to my heart has transformed my life. I have seen how trying to do the right thing makes my life work. I have seen how forgiveness heals old wounds. I have seen how I will not have the future I want if I don't clean up the past. I have seen how devoting myself to a higher purpose than just getting what I want makes my life work much better. I have seen that my relationships with other people, living in mercy and generosity and kindness, has given me a much more beautiful life. That's not only a gift that we have received, the knowledge of those things, the visceral understanding that they are true, That doesn't mean that now, oh, let's just enjoy ourselves. It means now we must extend that gift out into the world. What does that look like? Well, obviously I have one idea, but that's not even the point. Because in every way, what it looks like in every individual's life, in some ways is different. But for us to just, you know how the Course in Miracles says, a miracle is a shift in perception. If we just take everything, the deeper realms of being, that's why you come to a church. That's why you go to a synagogue. That's why you go to a mosque. That's why you go to therapy. That's why you go to an AA meeting. To sink down. Einstein said we would not solve the problems of the world from the level of thinking we were at when we created them. We need to come from a new thinking now. The 21st century is not old think. And so many of the crises that we are experiencing in our lives and in our country are because of things that came out of bad, loveless thinking from the 20th century. There's a new mindset now. There's a new paradigm. The 20th century was mechanistic. The world is a machine. If you don't like what's happening, tweak the pieces of the machine, which means everything is about symptom and nothing is about looking at root cause. But there's a physicist named James Jeans, and he said it turns out the world is not one big machine. It turns out the world is one big thought. In our thinking, we always have a choice. You're going to choose the loving thing here. You're going to choose being good here. You're going to choose being collaborative here. You're going to choose being righteous here. You're going to choose standing on your principles here. Or you're just going to always be asking me, and what do I want, what do I want? We always have that choice. And so does the country. What you do with what I just said is up to you. Once again, obviously, I have one thing that I hope you consider. But that's not the deeper point right now. The deeper point right now is that if all of us will just open our hearts now, we need a coalition of the decent, enough with who's right and who's left. We just need more people who know this is serious. And we love this country despite its faults. Yes, we have to look at some serious things and fix some things and correct some things. But we recognize that we have a sacred responsibility here. Rights, yes, but also responsibilities. Not to look away. Not to be so distracted that we're letting this amazing thing slip through our fingers. I know a woman who's a big documentary filmmaker from Europe, very successful. And she has done these amazing documentaries that have won all kinds of awards about very serious issues on the planet, human rights issues, etc. And she has known many of the world's leaders. And she said to me one day something that has stayed with me. She said, you know, I've talked to a lot of people in highest positions of power, many of whom are not always fans of the United States. They don't always think we've done the right thing. And I've asked them, what keeps you up at night? What worries you the most? What, like when push comes to shove, really like makes you like really, really worried for the world? She said, I was so surprised by how many of them said the following: what if America goes down? That's how important this country is. Not that we always get it right. Not that we're even getting it right now in so many ways, many of which I have elucidated here. But that at the heart of things, there is an invincible summer. At the heart of things, in our own history, there is the capacity to course correct. But we have to take it very seriously. And we have to consider it very deeply. And we have to stop thinking about it just through the identity of our silos. And we have to stop thinking about it in very shallow ways because the other people are going to do it. And we've got to stop using spirituality as a faux justification, because that's a faux spirituality for sitting this out. There is no religious or spiritual tradition anywhere that gives any of us a pass on addressing the suffering of other sentient beings. If we can just do that, we don't even have to know how we're going to do it. We don't even have to know what it looks like. But if we will move, Jim Doty has told me that the furthest, he said, what is happening in neurosurgery now, he says, is that we have always thought that the brain was the intelligence center of the body. He said we're now learning that there is a highway between the brain and the heart that we didn't even know existed before, and that the brain in partnership with the heart is the intelligence center of the body. Well, the brain in partnership with the heart is the intelligence center of a civilization. Knowing things intellectually. Many people know things intellectually, but because they behaved without heart, have brought us to where we are. Those of us who know that a heart-centered life is everything need to enter the conversation now. Not leave our best thinking behind, but forge within ourselves and within our thoughts of citizenship a partnership between the head and the heart. Then the resurrection will occur. Then the promised land will be found. Then the course correction will be made. Then we will do as other generations have done, stood up, risen up to the challenges of our time, so that we can then look in the mirror someday the way they ultimately looked at themselves in the mirror and say, damn it, we might have gotten there late, but we did it. And among other things, we will die knowing in our time we kicked ass the way we were born to do. My own personal formula. Maybe it's helpful for somebody here. Pray in the morning, kick ass in the afternoon. Thank you very, very, very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. You know, we can do this one of two ways. You can just be with what we have discussed, or we could do some Q&A if you'd like. It might be that you want to just be with what we've done and then just sort of moved away, because sometimes Q&A kind of takes you into a different part of the brain. But if you want to hold the same space and do a few questions, then we could. What would you like? What did you say? Huh? Take some questions? Okay. And may I ask what time it is, simply because I do have a plane and I need to be... Oh, we're fine. Okay. All right. We can do some questions, and this gentleman is going to do the, has a mic, and okay.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So what would you say to someone who, you've made the analogy I've heard before about recovery, you know, being in recovery and part of recovery. Part of being in Al-Anon sometimes is that you have to let the alcoholic go all the way down. And sometimes from the scorched earth is when, like, the new beginning starts. And you say, and at the end you said, America's gonna go down. Like, at what point do we stop the activism?
Well, sometimes you see an alcoholic or a drug addict behaving in ways that you realize, as they say in AA, there's a chair waiting for them. And they're just going to have to bottom out. Sometimes you see somebody fall down the stairs at the party or drive away stoned with a child in the back seat, in which case you say, no, we need to stage an intervention. They're going to kill themselves or kill somebody. And I think that's more where we are. You know, when it comes to drugs and alcohol, for reasons that are not pleasant, most of us are pretty sophisticated. You just brought up a topic which most Americans now, we understand. Nobody's in magical thinking about drugs or alcohol now. We know that you go too far, you could die. There's a limit past which you cannot abuse your body with drugs or alcohol and necessarily expect that the body will survive. It's called overdosing. It's dying of alcoholism. And when that seems to be the trajectory somebody might be on, somebody says to somebody else, You think we ought to do something? And most people in America now know what that means. And the other person says, I don't know any interventionists, do you? Yeah, I know somebody that we could call. And that's because enough of us have seen. She drove away. She was totally drunk, and the baby was in the back seat. You don't say about that person, oh, she just needs to bottom out. You say, we love her. We've got to do something. She could kill somebody. And I believe that's where we are. Because we're not in magical thinking about the human body when it comes to drugs or alcohol, but we still too often are in magical thinking when it comes to the survival of our democracy. We're like, oh, somebody will handle it. Really? Are you sure about that? Democracies do die, you know. There is no guarantee. And so that's how I answer your question. America's already bottomed out. I don't think it's a matter of, oh, America has bottomed out. The issue now is, I believe, the people need to intervene. Does that make sense?
Hi. Okay, I'm a believer that when there's a hole in the boat, you know what
I lost one hearing aid. It's not working. I need you to say that again.
Okay. I'm a believer that when there's a hole in the boat, we're called upon to pray and bail at the same time. Okay? So, relative to your speech, I think for myself, I certainly relate to the clarion call that you're presenting here. So that's the prayer part. But the bail, as an individual that lives in Reno, Nevada, and not running for president of the United States, other than voting for you, where do I find activism, or some way to influence the outcome?
The issues that we need to be most aware of right now and attending are not just in Washington. They're in Carson City. They're in Reno. A lot of the biggest issues of our day right now are really ground zero is in the state houses. So in order for us to have the season of repair that I believe is necessary, all of us have to start seeing activism as simply a layer of a well-lived, meaningful life. The traditional politician would say, running for president, let's say, I want to go to Washington and fight for you. Well, first of all, it's not my idea of a good time. My message is I would like to go to Washington and co-create with you a better chapter in American history. But it can't be just what I'm doing in Washington. It also has to do with what you're doing in Reno, what you're doing in Carson City. It all has to do with where you put your attention. For instance, you might say, I'm very concerned about domestic abuse in Nevada. Well, I'll tell you, you know what it's called? A Google search. You could write domestic abuse, Nevada, and all kinds of nonprofits are going to come up. All kinds of bills in your state house are going to come up. It's where you choose to look. And hope is born of participation in hopeful solutions. That's true about race, Native affairs. It's true about the environment. There's nothing going on that you can't find access to here if you choose to put that in your search bar. We've got to... We've got to, in ourselves and in each other, no more tolerance for the ditzy, for the distractiveness. No more women acting like girls, no more men acting like boys. And I have to say, transformational community, every system has to look at our own shadows. I think in a way we have contributed to this infantilization. Being involved in what's happening in the collective is part of our maturity. Spirituality should make you more mature, not less mature. Does that make sense? Yes. Thank you. Who's next? Anybody? Anything? Yes, ma'am. And then I'll go to you, too. Yes.
Marianne, I saw you last time at the farm, and your message is right on. We have to galvanize. We have to be a weapon of power to change. And I know that everyone in this room can do just that. And I thank you and I commend you. And I saw that you were on the ballot for us to vote in. And I'm like, I'm all there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that very, very much.
First, let me say thank you for the work you do.
Thank
and
you.
have always done.
Thank you.
Even up until now. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'd like to, when you were talking about all the systems that need to be in play, and education is one of them, it seems like we haven't had anybody really put attention to education. And as the United States, we used to be #1, and we are slowly going down. We live in Nevada, which is 59 in education. So, you know, where does education play in what you're talking about?
Okay. One of the things I want is the Department of Children and Youth. Unfortunately, the problem begins even before preschool. We have children who are traumatized before preschool. A conversation about universal preschool is already behind us. We now know that 90% of the brain is developed in the first 5 years. And there are children who are in this country in elementary school on suicide watch. We have in public schools throughout this country trauma rooms. We're losing teachers because too many teachers are saying, this is not what I signed up for. This is not what I was educated for. So I see education within a larger context of the trauma of the American child. None of that's not to even mention how many millions of American children in elementary school, middle school, and high school go to school every single day, having prayed in the morning, they won't get shot in school that day. You think we have a mental health crisis now? What's that going to be in 10 years? So that's why I want massive transfer of resources into the direction of children under the age of 10. But for me, that starts long before they even go to school. Before they even go to school. Now, I believe we should have a 10-year goal that every public school in America will be a palace of culture, learning, and the arts. But a hungry child cannot focus on reading. Children, I mean, we have so many problems that it's not even just a change in the schools. Now, I do want to say one thing about what you said. We're not slowly going down. We're already down. But let's talk about what that means. White children in advantaged neighborhoods are doing just fine. They are competing with the best of the best around the world. We are the only country that bases so much of our educational funding on property taxes. That right there goes against the principles of the Declaration of Independence. If government is to secure everyone's right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we have children going to school, and there are millions of them, going to school in schools where they don't even have the resources to teach a child to read by the time they're 10 years old. I think some of these schools might be here. And if a child cannot learn to read by the age of 10, the chances of high school graduation is drastically decreased, and the chances of incarceration drastically increased. Now, you're not going to hear any of the other political candidates, including a president and a former president, going to be talking too much about this. And why is that? Because children are not old enough to work, so there's no financial leverage there. They're not old enough to vote, so they're not a constituency. So their neglect is simply part of the way things work in Washington. There's not, when these institutions were founded, women were not even, they had no voice. And raising children was seen as women's work. And then once we started claiming a voice, I have always felt that that was a flaw in modern feminism, that there was not enough conversation about children. And so now if we don't advocate for these children, who's going to? But once again, it's got to start before school. A traumatized child, a hungry child. We have the highest poverty level of any advanced democracy, and that includes and that includes child poverty, which would, of course, mean hunger. So when you ask me about school, my mind, and as your president, my mind would go directly to, I got to make sure these kids can even eat. Does that make sense? So I see it all within the larger context. Now, I went to these schools in South Carolina, and there is one other state, and I don't know what it is. Someone told me, I think it might be another southern state, actually, where they have this thing called governor's schools. And in South Carolina, there are two of them. There's the Governor's School Arts and Humanities, and there's the Governor's School of Science and Technology. I couldn't believe these schools were so amazing. So amazing. They are public schools, but they are boarding schools, and there's a long, long line of kids trying to get in. And it was like, I want to go to this school. I want to be here. So I really got a view, wow, this is what schools could be and should be. But we are going to have to give a lot more attention, a lot more of our resources. You know, how a government spends its money, no different than how an individual spends its money. It expresses your values. And this is another area where, well, if you say, I'm not into politics, that's what you're saying you're not going to weigh in on. Does that make sense? And again, I'm sure that there are organizations here in Nevada. I'm sure that there are bills considered. I think that's very odd and amazing the way your state legislature only meets every other year. But I assume something's going on. But that's for you to handle, not for me to handle. But you know what? Fix it. I had a dream about a year ago. It was a very weird dream. And it was very dramatic. And it was about, I was going through this, and I'm not sure exactly what it was referring to, but it was very powerful. I was in a car. I don't know if I was in a car. I was running, and it was these very narrow streets. And on each side were these big houses and all these big houses, and they were very close to each other. But it was very dramatic. It was going down all these. It was going down. It was like going downhill and very curved roads and everything. And finally, I got to the place where I was at the end of this dramatic, hairpin turns going down. Not that it felt dangerous. It just felt like, why am I going on? And got down, and then on the wall, in these very shiny letters, fix it. And I always thought that was so odd. But I feel that's really the answer to a lot of things. Don't worry about it. Fix it. Fix it. Well, I think Americans are kind of paralyzed right now. A lot of people think we're apathetic. I don't sense that we're apathetic. I think people can't even believe where this country. We can't even believe it. I think, and I don't sense that the American people don't care. Let me tell you something. You know what I've learned from having run now twice? I felt this last time, and I feel it so much this time too. And I think this is very significant. The American people are not the problem. The American people are not the problem. And you can even look at that poll after poll, a little bit to the left of center. The consciousness of the American people is not the problem. It's a sclerotic political system that acts like a hand with a lid on it. With a lid on it. You will vote. They're even, at this point, choosing who you can vote for. I can tell you from my own experience, the system is so corrupt, and it's as corrupt as you think it might be, as rigged as you might suspect that it is. I'm here to tell you it's even more than you can even imagine. And the system is set up where if you don't have huge amounts of money or access to those who do have huge amounts of money, the system has no intention of allowing you to get anywhere near the pinnacles of power. Now, there's only one way to override that. And that's a massive awakening, a revolution at the ballot box among the people, particularly the people in New Hampshire, South Carolina, Michigan, and Nevada. Isn't that interesting? I think it's pretty profound, actually. But that's the way it is. Because those of you who might think, oh, they've got a lock on it, you're right, they do have a lock on it. But so did slave owners. And so did institutionalized oppression of women, and so did segregation. Other generations were not stopped by the realization they have a lock on it. Boo-hoo, poor me, I'm so traumatized. If I hear one more person say, I don't know, I just found the whole thing kind of traumatizing. You think the people who walked across the bridge at Selma weren't traumatized? You think the women suffragists who were thrown in prison for, what was their crime? They were marching for suffrage. And the conditions in the prison were so horrible that they went on a hunger strike. And the response of the prison officials was to send men into their cells who forced these metal contraptions on their necks to force feed them. Don't you think they knew a little anxiety? We have got to toughen up. Toughen up, Buttercup, a friend of mine said to me. Soft heart, but tough skin. If I can run for president, you can vote. You have no idea. I would say I'll write a book about it someday, but I don't even think I'm going to revisit some of the things I'm thinking about. Okay, anybody else?
This one over here.
Oh, yes, over here.
Thank you.
I'm going to get a sip of water, but I'm listening to you.
Yeah, so thank you for being you always, and
Thank you.
and everything that you bring into our world. I'm wondering how, with the policies and the programs that you want to bring into your presidency and into our country, how will they be paid for?
Okay, first of all, I want to point out to you that what they call, you want free everything, it's your money. It's your money. It's your taxes. We're asking what we're going to do with your money. Why should your money go to just give tax breaks to the very, very, very richest? Why? Why would we do that? That's why in the 1970s we had a thriving middle class. But in the last 50 years, we have had a $50 trillion transfer of wealth into the hands of 1%. So when you say, how are you going to pay for it? Maybe repeal some of these, like in 2017, there was a $2 trillion tax cut. And it gave 83 cents of every dollar to the very, very richest Americans and the highest earning corporations. You know, people say, oh, these corporations would leave if you don't cut their taxes. Did they leave in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s when we had a thriving middle class? They were here. They were here. And so that's number one. Also, you stop paying, do you know we pay multi-billion-dollar subsidies? There, in the world, I was reading today, if you put the whole world together, $7 trillion in subsidies to big oil. So in that area, and in so many others, your tax dollars go to paying huge multi-billion-dollar subsidies to corporations that are already making billions of dollars in profit. They will then take your tax dollars to create and manufacture items which they will then sell back to you in a price gouging way. I thought you didn't stand for an abusive relationship. I thought you wouldn't stand for a toxic relationship, because that's pretty toxic if you ask me. So right now, when you ask me, let's say even when you ask me, how do you pay for, let's say, universal health care? Right now, we are paying for it with our lives. Not having it, we are paying with our lives. 85 million Americans, underinsured or uninsured, 68,000 people a year who die from lack of health care in this country. An $88 billion medical debt, and guess what the profits are last year alone from the top 5 earning pharmaceutical companies? Their profit was $80 billion. Your debt was $88 billion. When I was a kid, Blue Cross Blue Shield was a nonprofit. You know, I think older people have a really important role right now because we remember a time when it wasn't like this. And we need to remind these younger people because they don't have a memory of a time when it wasn't this way. And there's a really important, we're the keepers of the story. It's really important, including free college until the 1970s, University of Florida, University of California, University of Texas. Elizabeth Warren has talked a lot about that, how cheap her college education was. That was before this unholy alliance of government, lending companies, and banks came up with this cruel college loan business. I mean, debt is crippling anyway. But to be in your 20s and you carrying tens of thousands of dollars worth of college loan debt, and then we wonder where the mental health crisis comes from? How could that person, and do you realize how many of the young people that I just described, on top of that, are living in their cars while attending classes? This is America. And these situations are now baked in the cake. Are any of the other candidates talking about maybe like fixing that? Just the way things are now. The way things are. And so at this point, some of these young people I've talked to, they say, well, they were told, get your college degree. And this is this whole self-actualization thing. Life, living, the pursuit of happiness. Get your college degree, we're told. They're told, do that, and then you'll close the wage gap and you'll have a great life. So they come out of school, and they have tens of thousands of dollars worth of debt. And then they look at the field that they got a degree to work in. How much money am I going to make beginning in that career? And they do the math, and they think, my God, I'm not going to pay this off until I'm in my 60s, which when you're in your 20s seems like an eternity. Once you're in your 60s, seems like it happened in 2 days. But you're 20, you don't know that yet. Okay? So then they say, I'm not going to work in that field. I want to work at a job where I could get out of this hell of this debt sooner. And then they go, why did I ever even get the degree? And we wonder where their anxiety comes from. We should be setting our young people up to win, not cutting them off at the knees. But these college loan debts and the fact that we don't have universal health care and the fact everything else we're talking about with the chemicals in our pesticides, the carcinogens in our food, is all due to a malevolent strain of capitalism. It is a malevolent strain that just burst onto the scene in the 1980s. It is soulless. It is this idea that all that should matter, those of us who are old enough, we're not trying to romanticize or whitewash American capitalism in our childhood. But tell me those of you who are old enough, tell me if I'm wrong. Wasn't there the sense that corporations were supposed to try to care? You know, it was just that people should try to, you remember people would retire and get gold watches and stuff? Remember? And now it's no, their profits, their short-term profits, the bottom line. No matter what it does to workers, no matter what it does to unions, no matter what it does to the environment, no matter what it does to the community. That has taken hold. It's an economic paradigm. And we've simply got to say, no. Ethics. I was reading a Camus quote. A man without ethics is like a monster loosed upon the world. So is an economic system without ethics. And I'm not saying, I'm not an anti-capitalist. Some people think that's inherent to capitalism. Actually, I don't. But there have to be ethical guardrails. There have to be guardrails where, no, you will not be allowed, the first principle of the United States that's relevant there is this idea that it is the role of the government to broker a balance between individual liberty and a concern for the common good. And part of that individual liberty should be economic liberty. You want to open that factory downriver? Good. I'm happy for you. You're going to create some jobs. Good on you, entrepreneur. But no, you cannot pour that toxic sludge into the river. No. You can have your factory. We hope you do well. But there are regulations here, and you cannot put the toxic sludge into the river, which then causes cancer in our children. No. And instead, during the 1980s, it was this orgy of deregulation. They called it job-killing regulations. Well, it's person-killing deregulation. These were safety regulations, environmental regulations. We can have it both ways if the government is performing that function, that both that balance is upheld to. But now the government is so bought up by those interests because of Citizens United, because of the undue influence of money on Washington. You've got to get, whether it's me or anyone else, you've got to get someone in there who's not from that system, who call it the way it is, who'll say that I don't care what those corporate interests want. Don't tell me if I say no to that I won't win again, because I'm not running again. In 2028, a boomer shouldn't be president anyway. We've got to get, I want to do a chiropractic adjustment on this country. I want to give the government back its heart, and quite a few people back our spine. If you're going to stand up to abusive, toxic relationships in your individual life, think about how that plays out on a larger level as well. Because we are allowing ourselves to be trampled on, we're allowing ourselves to be betrayed, and then every 4 years they come back like a man who cheats on you. Oh, baby, give me one more chance. At what point do you shake your girlfriend by the shoulder? No, don't pick up the phone when he calls. And don't vote for him either. What? Yeah, let's block his call. Block the vote. You know that rock the vote? Anybody else? Yes, one more. Yeah.
But it's tough when there aren't any better fish out in the sea. So my point is,
What are you, CNN, invisibilizing me?
But politically, if the corruption is as rampant as it is in Washington and Carson City and wherever, where are our alternatives?
Okay, you know what my biggest hope is as I leave here today? This is my biggest hope. You don't have to raise your hand, but it might be you. My biggest hope is that somebody in this room today who would never have expected it might be thinking, you know what? I might run for something. I might run for something. I might run for city council. I might run for city council. I might get started early when I'm young. I might start. It might be me. Why not me? That's what they want you to believe. Oh, it can't be you. That's the game. That's the narrative. That's the manipulation. Who are you? You're just the people. Might be you. I'm like a heat-seeking missile looking on the young people. But it's not just the young either. There are so many things. Get involved. Get involved. They have lured you into thinking, not you. You're not an expert. Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, so forth said it doesn't matter. There was a certain U.S. senator who, when I was running last time, every time she saw me, she said, "You having fun?" And then most of them were really nice people. But her whole thing was, "Are you having fun?" And one of the men was, "Are you having fun yet?" He always added yet. And the very tone was, "Who let you in here?" The very tone was, "Who let you in here?" You know what? I wish I had had the nerve to say to them, you look at me kind of as though to say, "Who let you in here?" And I'd like to give my response if I could. James Madison, with a little help from Susan B. Anthony. Bitch. Did we already go through here? I spoke somewhere. Okay, I've got to leave in 3 minutes, I'm being told. But let me just go through with you what the Constitution says is required to win the presidency or to be president. You ready? Number 1, 35 or older. Number 2, born here. Number 3, lived here for 14 years. It does not say had to have been a governor, had to have been a senator, had to have been a congressperson, had to have been a lawyer. Why? Because the founders were giving it to us. You know, the people, to determine for ourselves what we think is the skill set most required at any given time in our history to face the challenges of our time. If somebody says to you, she lacks experience, let me tell you the experience I've had, the suffering it's causing, the policies that those people are making. And they are making it being part of a system that has emotionally buffered them from the emotional realities caused by too many of those systems. If anyone lacks experience for what matters most at this time, they do. Their idea of qualification is someone qualified to maintain and perpetuate the system as it is. I think we need, in qualification, someone who's qualified to do exactly what we've been talking about here today. Lay it down and tell the truth that we all know. Say it. Say it. Say the quiet part out loud. Be honest. Be real. Fix it where we can. Clean up the past. Honor our ancestors. Honor our children, our children's children, our earth. Care about other human beings. Care about animals. Care about the planet. I believe that the idea of having someone sitting in the Oval Office who is aware of that is actually more required. We don't need more technocrats. We need a visionary. I'm not the greatest visionary in America, but I'm the only one running for the Democratic nomination for President of the United States. Thank you very, very much, everyone. Thank you. God bless you. Thank you. Thank you so, so much. Thank you, Reverend Lisa. Much love to you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.